I get asked a lot at my work whether DC reels are worth it or not. So in today's video, let's discuss that. Now, for those of you that don't know what a DC reel is, it is a digital controlled reel, right? There is a little chip in this reel that controls the spool at 1/1000th of a second. So basically, as that reel, as you take a cast, right, it is analyzing the spool and making sure that the spool is not running faster than what the line is coming out of the reel, right? So this is gonna help against backlashes and certain conditions where it's very hard to cast lures. This is going to help you. This is going to give you an edge compared to a non-digitally controlled reel. Now, DC reels really haven't been around for too long in the grand scheme of things here compared to how long the fishing industry has been a thing, right? They've really only gotten popular in about the last decade. It seems like John B. and some of those other YouTubers started dropping videos talking about DC reels that they got over in Japan or wherever else, and that was really what kind of blew up the reels, right? This is pretty much a Shimano only thing. I haven't seen a single other company make a DC reel other than Shimano. I think Shimano's the only one that has that really dialed in, but ever since those YouTubers started making those videos, Shimano seized on the opportunity and they saw how popular, they were getting in the American market and have since made reels that are pretty much an American version. This reel right here is the Metanium DC. This reel I actually bought from Japan. This was not even in the US market when I first bought this. Since that time, they have actually made specific reels just for the US market, such as the Corrado DC and the SLX DC. There's a couple more in there. The Scorpion DC is a JDM version or Japanese domestic market. There's also the Antares DC. There's a lot of different DC reels that we don't even have here still in the States, which is really cool. They've got a ton of different models. But I actually did a little poll on my Instagram here. I asked, how many of you have/want a DC digital control reel? And it was kind of interesting results. It wasn't too surprising. I had a feeling it was going to be a higher number, but I didn't know it was going to be this high. I want/have a DC reel got 85% of the votes versus no thanks, I don't want one got 15%. So most people have either heard of a DC reel or have a DC reel or want a DC reel, right? So they're obviously very popular in today's market. Now, a lot of the DC reels are very comparable to the reel that they made the DC after, right? So this right here is the SLX DC. It is a very comparable reel to the just regular Shimano SLX-A. The big difference is that digital control chip. There's a couple minor things in there, but for the most part, it's the same reel. And I would also say that on the Corrado DC versus a regular Corrado and the Metanium DC versus the regular Metanium. So it's basically that digital control, which is what you're paying that extra price up front for. Now, because of that extra technology in these reels, they do tend to make them a little bit heavier than a standard reel. So if you really like super light gear and you don't want to have that extra weight on you all day fishing, even though it's an ounce or two, then maybe DC reels are not for you. Now, there is a Metanium DC, the newest Metanium DC 70. That one is a 70 size and it is currently the lightest DC reel in the market, and it's basically weighing in at like some of the regular Corrados and Metaniums and some of those other ones. So I think they're starting to kind of figure out how to get those a little lighter. Granted, it is a smaller reel in general, but that is really cool. I think once they can dial that down and make those reels just as light as a regular standard baitcaster, I think that's going to be really cool to see. Despite the weight, these reels truly do cast like the videos you see. They make that really nice DC whine sound as you cast them, and they just cast a long ways. There's certain things on this reel that you can really, it's a big advantage versus just casting a regular baitcaster. And for beginners, this really reduces the learning curve of learning how to cast a baitcaster. I mean, this really does truly make things a lot easier. From what I've noticed, the DC reels really they excel the most in 3 conditions. The first one being windy weather. I think in wind, the DC reel really casts, it just casts much better. I think that's because of a piece of wind or some type of resistance as you cast. That DC, that control in there, it's actually helping control the spool so it doesn't get too out of whack, and it just keeps it flowing at the right amount, right, as that line is coming out. So windy conditions, the DC reel has really helped me out. The other one is light lures. So when a couple years ago, I did a video comparing a DC reel versus a non-DC, and I did some casts. So I did a casting competition. I believe it was the Corrado DC versus 2 other Corrado reels. So they were some older models, but they were all 3 Corrados. And the Corrado DC outcasted the other 2 the largest amount on the light lure category. I believe it was a Texas rig Senko that I did, and they all had the same rod, same line, and this one outcasted the other Corrados by a larger distance than with the other baits, which I believe were a half ounce or a 3/8 ounce jig, and then I did, I think, a top water or something. So this one really excelled in that light lure category. The last instance that I think this does really good on compared to a regular baitcast reel, this is one that not many people talk about, but that is on odd profiled baits. And what I mean by that is, like, for instance, a wacky rig Senko. A wacky rig Senko is very odd because it's got a hook right in the middle, and there's just a lot of excess plastic hanging off each side. And for me, that is not a very fun one to cast with a baitcaster. I feel like you get more backlashes and you just have a lot less accuracy casting it than you do on a spinning setup. However, my go-to wacky rig Senko setup, I have kind of a specific setup that I use for Senkos. I love it. I have the Metanium DC on right here because this Metanium DC casts a Senko, wacky rig or Texas rig, better than any spinning setup that I have in my arsenal. So I think on very odd profiled baits, another one I think you could include in that category is like one of those big flutter spoons. I would think, let's see here, even like a weightless Texas rigged, like a big brush hog or something, even though those are still a little bit slimmer, there's some weird shaped baits that these just do really well on. I think you could actually classify certain jerk baits and crankbaits in that category as well. I guess the word I'm looking for here is non-aerodynamic lures. These cast non-aerodynamic lures way farther than a traditional baitcaster, and sometimes even farther than a spinning setup, which is really cool. Those are my 3 really big situations that I would use a DC reel for. You can obviously just use it for regular baits as well. I mean, it's still going to absolutely fling a super heavy jig or a weighted Texas rig or something like that as well. But those are the 3 that I really see the biggest difference in. Now, the easiness to cast for me on these is kind of a gift and a curse. It's kind of a double-edged sword, if you will, because new beginner anglers really aren't fully getting that baitcast experience anymore. I feel like those first couple backlashes, those first couple times of really struggling with a baitcaster kind of develops character. I had to start on a cheap clamshell packaged Abu Garcia $60 baitcast reel, and I had a lot of backlashes and a lot of trouble my first couple fishing trips, and heck, actually first probably year of fishing a baitcaster. And I think some of that builds character, and I feel like these are getting to a point now where, although they're not backlash proof, they make it much easier to not get backlashes, and I do love that. But I think beginner fishermen that are learning how to cast a baitcaster, they're going to use one of these, they're going to be spoiled, and then they're going to go use a regular baitcaster, and nothing's going to beat that, right? They're going to struggle. It's like they stopped the learning curve for now, and then if they use a non-DC reel, they're going to go right back to that learning curve, versus I learned the hard way, so now I can just fish anything. So I do think they are still great for beginners because, like I said, they reduce that learning curve, but I do think it's nice to practice with also non-DC reels. That way you understand the differences between those two and know that it's not always this easy. Like I said, you can still have your fair share of backlashes on these. Even the Metanium DC, I have backlashed plenty of times in the past, but it is much easier. Now, price is definitely a point we got to talk about with DC reels here because, they're expensive. I mean, compared to, the regular SLX is $100, the SLX DC is $200, right? The regular Cораdos are anywhere from like 180 to 200. The Corrado DC is $250. Then you've got reels like the Metanium DC, which are $500. You've got like the Antares DC, which is $600 to $700. So they're very expensive. I mean, and even in the bass fishing baitcast world, the DC reels on average are going to be on the expensive side. So it's kind of a question of is that technology really worth it to you? That is honestly a question that I don't think I've fully answered yet. I do think in certain situations the DC reels are phenomenal, and I've talked about this in the past. I really do love them, but sometimes I do think there are normal standard baitcast reels that could outfish these. A big argument that you could say here, right, is the SLX DC is basically just a regular SLX reel with a digital control chip in there. Well, for $200, instead of getting the SLX DC, you could just get a regular Corrado, right? And now you have all these upgraded components. You have got an MGL spool. You've got extra features that this reel doesn't have, just because it's not a DC. And that's a great argument because I honestly think that would be a great comparison, comparing the SLX DC versus the new Corrado, I believe it's the M. That would be a great comparison because I do think those reels are pretty evenly matched, even though this is a DC reel. There definitely is some novelty to having a DC reel. I mean, the sound it makes and just, being into collecting fishing gear. I'm kind of a reel nerd, especially a Shimano reel nerd. I love the DCs for that aspect. It's really cool to have a DC reel and to be able to fish with it. And, I fish enough and I put enough time and money into my sport that, I'm okay buying expensive equipment because I just really like how expensive equipment fishes. And if that's not what you're into, then maybe DC reels aren't for you. Maybe it's not worth it for you to buy, spend the extra money on a digital controlled reel. It really comes down to, are you fishing in those situations that I talked about above, right? With the light, light lures, wind, do you need it for a specific purpose? Or do you just like the novelty of a DC reel? Do you like the sound it makes? Is it just, you want to be a part of the new best thing like I want to be a part of? Or, is it something where you just really don't want it? It's not worth it to you. There are people out there that don't like DC reels. They think they're not that good. And there's some arguments I think that could support that claim. I honestly want to know your guys' opinions on DC reels. Do you like them? Do you not like them? And whichever one you say, please tell me why. I want to know why do you guys not like digital controlled reels. So leave some comments down below. I want to get a topic, a discussion on this. I feel like DC reels have been around long enough now where I think it's time to have a talk. And, are they worth it? Are they great reels or are they just garbage? So leave a comment down below. I want to know your guys' opinions on this. And hopefully you guys got a kick out of today's episode. See you guys next time on Humbug Videos.